So welcome to our study of Jakob Mipham Rinpoche's Sword of Wisdom. And as always, kindly bring to the study the intention of applying it for the benefit of all of us sentient beings wandering in samsara, understanding the core conditions for suffering, and also the core conditions for addressing this suffering. But this is particularly where we then are presently looking on the essentials when it comes to us understanding the nature of the path. So welcome to this study. We'll begin with invoking the wisdom of Jakob Mipham. Through the blessing of awareness, emptiness, Manjushri Kumara, you open the expanse of wisdom and its 8 minds of confidence, thus mastering the vast treasuries of transmission and realization. Mipham Manjushri Gosha, I supplicate you. So some of you know I'm going to be how do you say absent? I'm going to absent myself next year, already from Christmas, and so just with regards to and I'm going to be going to Europe, so that's where I would like you to note that the sessions on the 14th and 21st of December, they will be in the evening Australia time, 7:30 to 8:30 Australian Eastern Daylight Saving Time. And on the 7th and 28th, there shan't be anything. So we'll have our last session on the 21st. We'll be continuing this also here in November, I think, also because I'm going to be in New Zealand. I'm going to be in New Zealand up in a retreat center. It's a little bit remote. And what is it again? It's going to be, the 24th. Sorry, the 23rd. I'll try to see if I can get online. I'm not sure if in the program we've mentioned that it's cancelled. It could be a little bit problematic, but I'll give it a try. So we'll see. Yeah. Anyway, so that's just with regards to some of our study, and also I'm thinking I really would like to complete this text, and that might mean that some of these sessions, and I could imagine particularly the last 2, could possibly go for a little bit longer, just because I'd like to cover the material. And then again, if not, then we'll just simply read through the text, and I'll expound a little bit upon the meaning, but we might have to go a little bit brief on the commentary. Anyway, presently all is well, and we'll just proceed as we normally do. We are then looking at this, what we call the 4 reliances. So we've looked at rely on the teachings, not on the teacher. So that's where we look at the Dharma itself. And like I said last time, this is also what Paltram Rinpoche says. At the early stages, it's very difficult for us to really appreciate a teacher. And that's why it's so important that we understand the logic of the teaching, that we come to the teaching on the basis of faith in the teaching itself. And also, it also means that with regards to when we're approaching the teaching, we might see that the teacher is not perfect, but we can still rely on the teaching. So that's where again we would say rely not on just the person, but on the Dharma. So now we're looking at the next one, which is rely on the meaning, not on the words. So here in the root text, Mipham Rinpoche writes, when intelligent ones hear and contemplate the Dharma, they should rely on the meaning and not on the words. If the meaning is understood, there is no contradiction, no matter how it is expressed in words. Things are named because of wanting to express an understandable meaning. Once the meaning has been understood, if the speaker keeps trying to formulate it in words, It's like continuing to search for tracks after an elephant has been found. So, if one elaborates further, because of attachment to words, concepts proliferate endlessly, wandering further and further from the meaning. Immature beings just make themselves tired. For a single phrase like bring me the wood, if wood is differentiated according to its locale, etc., the possibilities are endless. Once one has understood the meaning of the phrase, then the words have fulfilled their purpose. When a man points to the moon with his finger, a childish person looks at the finger instead. Foolish ones who adhere to the words have difficulty understanding, even though they think they understand. So, of course, this we have very often in a worldly context where people are more get sort of hung up on the words, and they might feel that a phrase, for example, should be, or a meaning should be articulated in a different phrase. So this is, for example, where we very often have these misunderstanding across cultures. Some people might feel something is, for example, somebody might have a good intention with regards to a statement, but then they use a phrasing that might be deemed, for example, politically incorrect. And that's where then instead of looking at what the person intends, there's looking at the words. So this happens a lot. But particularly then when we come to the Dharma, that's where it's important to understand the meaning behind it. So, of course, from the outside, then we have the possibilities of misunderstanding if we don't understand, for example, the context. There might be teachings intended for bodhisattvas, but from the monastic point of view, some of those teachings might be inappropriate, or not to mention Vajrayana teachings and so forth. So that's where, if we understand the meaning, then we would see how all the Buddhist teachings, in fact, are in concordance, how all the various teachings, in fact, simply have a single intention. So that's where, if we can step outside of this sort of parochial addiction to just looking at the words and instead understand the meaning that's behind, then we'll see all the various teachings we have in the Buddha Dharma, they all perfectly coincide. So that's again where the intention is what really matters. And then the words, they then really just serve the intention. Once something has been understood, then we don't need to go on. That's where sort of, once something has been, it's clear, then there's no need to go on explaining things. The Dharma is really about just understanding something. The words are really just a means to achieve that. So, for example, like Mipham Rinpoche says, if you're living in a house where there's a stack of wood outside and you're building a fire, somebody says, bring me the wood, then there's no need to say, bring me the wood that is downstairs in the courtyard that has been chopped into bits and which is blah, 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 blah. So that's where we really need to just understand. This is about making clear communication that is understood. And of course, then it's also important that we understand what is the intention. If somebody's pointing to the moon, then the intention is to point out the moon. The way that it's done, the finger and so forth, is secondary. So that's where we don't worry about the detail of the of the, or we don't fixate on that which is not the objective. So here the Kempo then, excuse me. So when hearing and contemplating the Dharma, in order to eliminate misunderstanding, one should rely on the meaning expressed rather than the words that express it. If one accurately understands what the subject matter means, then the words that express the meaning are acceptable and not contradictory, regardless of whether the words are good or bad or grammatically correct, and so on. The purpose of words is to name things so that the desired meaning will be understood. Once the words have conveyed the meaning and the meaning is understood, if the speaker keeps elaborating with more words, it's like somebody continuing to search for the tracks of an elephant that has already been found. If one keeps elaborating merely because one is attached to words, the only thing that will increase are the words. So implicitly here, the the words will increase, the understanding won't increase. If you already said, bring me the wood, then the other person got it, then anything beyond that is actually just pointless. So verbal constructs proliferate endlessly until conceptualization ends. And that's where, again, about the wood, you could go endlessly on about describing the wood and the process of picking it up and so forth. Wandering further and further from the meaning that has not been understood, immature, foolish ones just make themselves tired. So that's where once, if the point has been made, no need to go on. For instance, in relation to a single phrase like bring me the wood, if wood is differentiated according to its type, locale, the time, the possibilities are endless. However, the mere words bring me the wood need not be understood that way. If one understands and merely brings the wood that is relevant in that situation, then the language has fulfilled its purpose. In order to show the moon to a child, when someone indicates the moon with his finger, the child will look at the finger, not understanding to look at the moon. Similarly, foolish people become attached to the words that are merely the means of expression. When they investigate only the words instead of investigating what the subject matter means, even though they think they understand the subject matter, they have a hard time understanding it. This should be fairly straightforward. But of course, in the case of the Buddhist teaching, because we would say the teaching addresses so many different individuals, across, you could say, intelligence, disposition, interest, temperament, time, culture, and so forth, then of course there's so many different teachings, and that again is where we'd want to understand that when a teaching is taught in, let's say, 13th century Tibet or 13th century Japan or 20th century USA, the language is bound to be very different. So that's where there's going to be all sorts of ways in which these are understood. And again, within these particular cultures, there will be different individuals with different capacities. So we have such an enormous array of Buddhist teaching. You could say until the present day, until the 20th century, yes, then there was a sort of consistency, certainly within the particular cultures. Of course, in Japan, it would be expressed in a very Japanese way. Similarly, in Tibet, China, and other places. But bottom line is that there is all these various teachings, but they all have a single intention. And that's also in regards to then the capacities of beings. And that's why we sometimes talk about different yanas, different vehicles. And this will also look in terms of the definitive and provisional meanings. Anyway, in relation to this, the great commentary on the Kalachakra Tantra says, whether the words are plot proper or slang, a yogin can grasp the meaning. Milk certainly mixes with water, yet a swan can extract and drink the milk. Oh, I didn't know that. This is something that comes up several times. So those of you who might be familiar with the digestive functions of the swans might be able to confirm this. Anyway, this is news to me. So the absolute truth does not rely on language. Great beings do not rely on the words. If one knows what the words on the absolute truth mean, how could commentarial words go further than that? And Guru Rinpoche is really one of the really great students of Guru Rinpoche, Nupchen Sandhyeshe, says in his Lamp of the Eye of Meditation, Samten Migdran, he says, in brief, the best way to understand is to understand in brief, the best way to study is to understand the meaning. The Mirror of the Dharma states, it is better to truly understand one word than to hear a multitude of words. The Sutra of the Descent to Lanka states, what is called being very learned is being an expert in the meaning. It is not being an expert in the words. There are many similar scriptures that support this understanding. So I think it's fairly clear what we're talking about here, but it is something that's an issue. It's an issue within, you could say, secular contexts, our everyday life, and you could say across cultures and across subcultures, between individuals and so on. So important to just for ordinary peace to just be able to discern what is the meaning. But also then here, particularly with regards to all the various Buddhist teachings, there are so many different ways in which we approach this approach, understanding what is true, and also the words that engage this understanding. So that's the second one, rely on the meaning, not on the words. Then the third one, rely on the definitive meaning, not on the provisional meaning. So that's why we have teachings that, for example, describe things in terms of our ordinary conventional reality, and they're very different. If you're talking to, again, you're talking to a Tibetan person in the 18th century, and you're talking to a person in the USA in the 20th century, the teachings will be presented in very different ways. And there's very different realities that apply for such persons. And yet, all of them, they have just a single meaning in the ultimate sense. So that's why we would say the provisional meaning, that's dependent on circumstances, belief systems, and so on. For example, we have the teachings on the universe within the what do we call it again? The Indo-Tibetan cosmology, with Mount Meru in the middle and the 4 continents and so on, which we offer when we do mandala offering. Now, this already from the Tibetan zones side, I remember Tugurjin Topil talking about this, how that presentation is entirely provisional, and even in the scriptures, there's a difference between the way the universe is described in the Abhidharma and in the Kalachakra. So that's what we would call provisional meaning. They're simply just different. And of course, we then operate within our culture a particular way of understanding the universe. So that's where there's provisional meanings, and they're absolutely fine. They're necessary. They have to do with our relative, even when we talk about practicing the path, that's provisional meaning. In the absolute, there's no requirement for the path, since in the absolute, there's no delusion. There's no inherently existing delusion. So anytime we talk about cause and effect, karma, samsara, suffering, New York City, the atom bomb, all of that is provisional meaning. Now, when it comes to definitive meaning, that is where the Buddha intends to show us what is the true nature of reality. Then we talk about this as the definitive in terms of, for example, identifying how phenomena they appear, yet they have no reality. And this is where the teachings, they become increasingly profound as we progress along the path. So we begin, for example, with the teachings that are essentially provisional, but then we come to the teachings on emptiness, teachings on Buddha nature, and so on, which are then what we call definitive. So here then, Mipham Rinpoche writes, next, for the third reliance, the root text says, when one engages in the meaning, one should know the provisional meaning and the definitive meaning, and rely on the definitive rather than the provisional. Since the omniscient one was all-knowing, he taught the jhana in sequence, like steps ascending a staircase, according to students' style, capacities, and interests. So here we're going to look at this in terms of the general, and then a more specific in terms of the definitive later on, and also about intentions. So that's where, again, identifying the needs of sentient beings, the Buddha would provide various skillful means. We have this very famous example from the Samadhi Sutra, where the Buddha, in talking about the difference between the provisional and definitive meaning, would say that if, for example, you have children that are inside a house and they're in great danger, possibly there's a fire or the danger of a fire, and you want to get them out of the house, They might be playing and they don't want to leave the house. And that's where then the Buddha would say the skillful means here would be to sort of arrange toys and delicious foods and so on. Say to the kids, come on out and have some play out here or have some delicious food, and then the kids will come out. And of course, the meaning is to save them from the danger inside the house. But the means for doing so is not going to be to try to explain to them what's happening. Rather, you just need them to come out without having to explain the whole story and just say, get out of the house. There's some yummy treats and some toys. So that's the sort of classical explanation we have in the Samadhi-Raj Sutra. Anyway, the meaning should be fairly clear. And so here the Khenpo says, when studying and contemplating the meaning of the scriptures, one needs to know how to distinguish the definitive meaning of the Buddha's words from the provisional meaning. Once one knows this, one should rely on the definitive meaning and not the provisional one. And again, here it is that once we understand the definitive meaning, the nature of emptiness, the nature of the luminous ground, and the nature of the ultimate nature of samsara and nirvana, then all the various other teachings, they actually fall into place. So if we can grasp the definitive meaning, then we understand the provisional ones easily. Whereas being stuck on the provisional teachings will fail to understand the definitive meaning. So by means of direct perception, the Buddha knows the true nature and the full context of phenomena without the slightest obscuration. He is omniscient regarding the beings to be trained and the methods for training them. In order to lead students step by step to the state of Buddhahood according to their styles, capacities, and interests, Buddha taught the sequence of the yanas as the way to engage in training. So this is where we then come across the gradual path as such that enables beings to gradually approach the definitive meaning based on the provisional skillful means of the various vehicles, the yanas. The Khenpo goes on to say, like the steps on a ladder, the yanas start with the listeners or shravakas, along with the followers of realism or vibhashikas, and extend up to the Vajrayana and the most secret and unexcelled Ati Yoga. So that's where we have the yanas that initially take reality as being solid. And then so that's where we, on the case of the Shravakas and and we have the Vibhashikas and Sotantikas that are what we call substantialists. They take things for being real. And that's where we would say where we would generally talk about what we, for example, in our culture refer to as science, as being that which essentially understands phenomena according to simply just how they appear. There appears to be substance. And we work with that, and that's a very successful science. It simply just takes matter for being real. But when it comes then to the Shravakas and the Vibhashikas and Sotantikas, which are part of the Shravaka vehicle, that's where there is a degree of insight that takes place, and that's where we say there's a slight degree of analysis that takes place, and that's where then phenomena are understood down to their, you could say, atomic dimensions, the indivisible particles. And then there's the thorough analysis, which is according to the Madhyamika, which then sees that phenomena don't have any reality, no inherent existence whatsoever. And that's where this departs from the idea of realism or substance. So we can see there's a gradual progression that depends on the degree to which we investigate or analyze. And then there's also the skillful means that sees the greater vision, that sees all phenomena as inseparable from this emptiness, which is then the scope of the Vajrayana. And that's then where phenomena is seen as being permeated by emptiness and as such intrinsically pure, and as such phenomena understood in terms of their pure disposition according to the Vajrayana pure vision. And that, of course, even takes further beyond any conceptual constructs whatsoever, which is then the path of Ati Yoga or Tsokpa Chenpo. So the Mahaparinirvana Sutra states, "My profound teachings are like the steps of a ladder. Endeavor and train in them in succession, one after another, without jumping ahead." So again, there in general in the Mahayana, when we talk about the yanas, we generally talk about what is known as the three yanas, which is very different from the way Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche talks about the three yanas, where there we talk about the Shravaka yana, the Pratyekya Buddha yana, and the Bodhisattva yana. So these are what then understood as the gradual path and the three yanas. But that's then where this is understood as the various steps on the path. The Anu Yoga Tantra, the overview of the great scripture of the embodiment of the realization of all Buddhas, Do Gompa Dupa, it says the ultimate definitive yanas clearly appear in three groups: the yanas that lead away from the cause of suffering, the yanas of austerities, and the yanas of skillful means of transformation. So the first is refers to the first three yanas, namely the ones I just referred to, namely the Shravaka, Pratyekya, Buddha, and Bodhisattva yanas. And then we have the yanas of us, and these are them that work with the cause of suffering. So they essentially, on the basis of insight into the nature of suffering and the cause of suffering, eliminate these on the basis of the gradual path, the three trainings, and so on. And then you have the yanas of austerities, the practice of yoga, practice of purity, and aligning oneself with body, speech, and mind, with the pure nature of our experience, our world in terms of its experience of body, speech, and mind. And that's skillfully bringing perceptions and appearances onto the path. And that's where the yanas of Kriya, Kriya Yoga, Upa Yoga, and Yoga. These then constitute the yanas of austerities. And there's a lot of emphasis in these in behavior. So this is where then we would say persons who practice these yanas, they abstain from particular lifestyles, and generally emphasize purity. And then we have the yanas of the skillful means of transformation, which is recognizing the entire array of the phenomenal world as inseparable from wisdom. And that's where then we have the inner, what we call the inner tantras, the Mahayoga, Anu Yoga, and Ati Yoga. So these then, they identify how everything that appears and exists never moves from this infinite purity. And simply integrating that vision in increasing subtle ways is then the skillful means of transformation. So that's how we understand then the gradual path in terms of the gradual, you could say, approaching of the definitive meaning. So it says many similar quotations could be cited. Among the teachings of the 9 yanas, the lower ones are provisional teachings and the higher ones are definitive. What are the provisional meaning and the definitive meaning? The omniscient king of Dharma, Longchen Rabjam, expressed them as follows in the precious key for assessing the provisional and the definitive. And this is actually, sorry, this should be in italics because this is the title of our work. He says that the definitive meaning is the true nature of all phenomena just as it is. This nature is pure, like space. It is the realization of the mind's luminosity. Being naturally pure and unchanging, its sky-like nature transcends arising, abiding, and ceasing. Without exception, the sutras and shastras that teach this are included in the definitive meaning. So that's where the we understand that the ultimate nature of all of reality is as described here, and then we have the sutras such as the Prajnaparamita teachings, the Prajnaparamita sutras, and shastras such as the Madhyamaka teachings and so on. These all point to this pure, unchanging nature. And then he says, on the other hand, the provisional meaning is all the phenomena that appear, that arise and cease, that come and go, are pure and impure, with their various parts, such as the aggregates, sense sources, and constituents of a person. So that's why we talk about the ordinary phenomena that we think of as being real. These dreamlike appearances, Longchenpa says, are assessed and imputed with words, thoughts, and expressions. All the sutras and shastras that teach the provisional meaning are part of the relative truth. So that's where the teachings that deal with the fact that we say are held by our dualistic fixation, and in which then the experience of samsara, as it unfolds in terms of cause and effect, this then the teachings that take this experience into account and works skillfully with, you could say, employing our experience as skillful means, as a means for awakening. These then are what we call provisional meaning, and these are part of relative truth. For example, speculating about the sky-like nature of mind and words, expressions, and thoughts is the relative truth. The true nature, which is absolute truth, is the authentic, definitive meaning. So that's where, again, even the words that we have, and this is where we sometimes, for example, in the Madhyamaka teaching, we talk about the Madhyamaka of words and the Madhyamaka of, or the ultimate Madhyamaka, where the Madhyamaka of words are, of course, the teachings themselves. And these then are where we could view these as even the words that describe this nature, those could be seen as provisional or relative truth. As relative truth. Forget about provisional. The true nature, which is the absolute truth, is the authentic, definitive meaning. That's where that which is beyond words and concepts, that is that's the definitive. So in this way, we could say the dhyanas, as we progress, they become increasingly subtle. In brief, the true nature of the sutras that teach it are called the definitive meaning. Teachings that lead the minds of sentient beings to the true nature by means of skillful methods, and teachings on which is impure and diluted with all its categories are called the provisional meaning and its sutras. The system of the definitive meaning and provisional meaning is taught first in order to be like a mirror for looking at phenomena and a key that opens the door. And that's again the skillful means of the Buddhist path, is that it doesn't just teach, this is nature of reality, this is the non-dual nature, get with the program. Rather, it accommodates the fact that we have particular experiences, and it utilizes these experiences as the path. So that's why the fact that we, for example, have a body, well, then we attend to this body. We don't just say, well, it's all empty, just get out of your body or whatever, or let go of your body. The body becomes a vehicle. It's the body on the basis of which we sit and we practice meditation. It's the speech which we then can direct towards the absolute nature through alignment with proper speech, and right speech, and even mantras and so forth that align us with the definitive meaning of the nature of appearance and emptiness. So then we come to the to what is known as the definitive meaning, and rather here the 8 intentions. And this is something that a lot of us would have come across in the Buddhist teaching, where we can see, we use it ourselves, where we can see, again, coming back to the children that were being led outside. We can also see how the Buddha uses and the teachers use different language and different words and styles of teaching in order to make the point. So here Mipham Rinpoche says there are 8 categories of intentions and indirect intentions based on the Buddha's purpose regarding the basis for the intention. He spoke this way because it suited his purpose, whereas taking the words literally would impair valid cognition. So that's why we have the Buddha saying different things at different times according to whoever he's addressing. So the Khenpo comments, so that the definitive and provisional meanings will be clear and the real meaning of intention will be understood. I will now explain the classifications called intentions and indirect intentions. The Tathagata teaches the Dharma to students according to their styles, capacities, and interests, and his purpose is connected with the system of intentions and indirect intentions. If a student doesn't accurately understand the intention of a teaching and instead apprehends it according to the words, then the student won't realize the true meaning. So that's where we very often have this situation of us being overly literal or not understanding the concept and context. So that's essentially what we're talking about here. It depends who we are being spoken to. So that's, again, says, since it is a mistake to apprehend an interpretal teaching according to its provisional meaning or its literal meaning, it's very important to distinguish these. So that's again where teachings, they are intended according to a particular audience, and that's where, unless we actually, that's where we don't want to sort of misinterpret what the objective is just on the basis of the particular context and audience, or rather we should understand how the teachings are presented in a particular context and particular audiences, and as such they need to be presented in various ways. So anyway, we'll look at this, and essentially again this is about enabling a meaning to happen. So in individuals' understanding on the basis of, you could say, words. So we talk about 4 intentions. You'll excuse me, I got a bit sort of nerdy here and wanted to include the Sanskrit and the Tibetan just because this was new material to me. So we have what's going to be discussed here. The 4 intentions are: first, the intention related to equality, samatha bipraya or nyampani la gompa, and intention related to another meaning, artantara bipraya du shen la gompa. Intention related to another time, kalantarabi praya, dön shen lagomba, and then intention related to individuals' thoughts, pudgala tarabi praya, gangsak shen lagomba. So these 4: equality, another meaning, another time, and individual thoughts. First, among the categories of intentions and indirect intention, drawn from the Sanskrit term Chatvara Vipraya, there are 4 intentions. To explain these, the ornament of the Mahayana Sutra states, and again this should be in italics, one should know the 4 kinds of intention as related to equality, to another meaning, to another time, and to an individual's thoughts. So again, this is where these are things that we operate with intuitively, but at the same time, you could say the beauty and the clarity that we have in the Buddhist teaching is that these are mapped out and discussed. I mean, undoubtedly within probably sort of, how do you say, study of linguistics and sort of structuralist studies and so forth, you know. Saussure, Lacan, and all these guys undoubtedly would also have Wittgenstein and so forth. They would undoubtedly also have studied these, you know, sort of language games and so forth. But nevertheless, here we have this articulated, and again, this is something that we probably would be familiar with, and we can appreciate the skill that's implicit in what's being identified here. So the main purpose of the four intentions is that they are related to what others need. First, having the intention related to equality. The Buddha Shakyamuni said, at that time I was the Buddha Vipashin. Here, the implication is that we'll see this later, but the implication is to see that the Buddha is not just the Buddha. He's actually somebody who also was another Buddha. Anyway, that's the intention related to equality. Having the intention related to another meaning. There are statements such as all phenomena are essenceless. There is no form, there is no feeling, and so on. This intention is related to the absolute truth and does not mean that conventional things are non-existent. So that's why we use words to talk about emptiness, but it doesn't contradict relative truth. Having the intention related to another time, the Buddha said, by merely saying the name of a Buddha, one will be born in the realm of the Buddha. Here the Buddha's intention was that the person will certainly be born there at some point, but it is uncertain whether the birth will happen immediately after this life. And that's also where we very often would see teachings that say, on the basis of this action, this will happen. But of course, we don't know. We don't know exactly if it will be that. For example, we would say somebody who sees the Kamapa's crown will be liberated. But of course, we don't know exactly when, and so forth. So an example of having the intention related to an individual's thoughts is that if a person holds the idea that generosity alone is sufficient, then that person is told that generosity is inferior and discipline is praised as superior. Each of these four intentions therefore has its own particular purpose. So that's, for example, if somebody is very attached to the practice of generosity, then the teacher might say, oh, you know, discipline is really important. I remember once a friend of mine, she went up to, she was standing next to Dingo Chandra Rinpoche. She was a student of his, a very close student. And Rinpoche, she was, you know, she was, how do you say, reciting mantra. And Rinpoche says, what are you reciting? And she says, oh, I'm reciting Vajraguru mantra. And Rinpoche says, don't you like the Mani mantra? Of course, this is not that Rinpoche has anything against the Vajraguru mantra, but he was just, you know, teasing her. And such a beautiful way. Rinpoche had such a beautiful way of interacting with people. And just sort of blowing her mind a bit. Anyway, so then, yeah, so I thought I'd just read from the book, particularly in regards to this section here, where it explains a little bit. It says here, each of the four intentions, therefore, has its own particular purpose. To explain further, the great emanated translator Kawapalsek says in his Dictionary of Dharma Terminology, what are the four intentions? They are the intention related to equality, the intention related to another time, the intention related to another meaning, and the intention related to an individual. Although a different meaning is applied to what is immediately understood, the teachings are not contradicted by a single word. Taming beings by such skillful means is called the four intentions. For the intention related to equality, since neither the Buddha of the past nor Shakyamuni Buddha was endowed with a greater or lesser degree of the Dharmakaya, meaning greater or lesser degree of enlightenment, a greater or lesser accumulation of merit and wisdom, or greater or lesser enlightened activity that benefit beings, Buddha Shakyamuni said, previously I was the Buddha of the past. This is the intention related to equality. And this is because somebody might think, oh yeah, well, here's this Buddha, and you know, he's just, he's not as great as the Buddhas of the past. And that's where the Buddha might say, you know, I'm no different. For example, Guru Rinpoche would say, you know, I'm no different from the Buddhas of the three times. So that's where understanding this equality is really important, that we understand, for example, the teacher. We would say the teacher's wisdom is no different from that of the Buddhas, and so forth. So that's where the Guru Rinpoche would say, you know, I am no different from the Buddha. So 3 times, and the Buddha Shakyamuni says, previously I was the Buddha of the past. Simply just to break some particular concept about hierarchy. For the intention related to time, it is said, if you recite the name of one Buddha, such as Amitabha or Avalokiteshvara, you will become enlightened. For example, also we would say, if somebody hears the name Milarepa, then they will become enlightened. I remember I had a friend who, this was in India, and she would always go over to dogs and animals and so on and say, Milarepa, Milarepa, into their ears. So that's where this is what we call liberation by hearing. And it says here, this means that although one is not enlightened now, based on recitation practice as the cause, at some point one will become enlightened. A similar example is the saying, whatever aspirations are made will come to pass accordingly. Although it isn't the case now, it will happen eventually because of the cause. This is an intention related to another time. An intention related to another meaning is illustrated by the Buddha saying, one will not hear the sutras unless one has honored as many Buddhas as there are sands in the Ganges River. This doesn't mean that we cannot perceive the sutras right now. This is said so that someone will attain the first Bodhisattva Bhumi. This is the intention related to another meaning. So this is again the encouragement that might bring about a particular practice that then prompts the attainment of the Bhumis. So the intention related to an individual can be seen from how praising devotion to and strength in a virtue such as discipline stimulates someone to practice it. Similarly, so that someone who thinks that guarding ordinary discipline is the highest virtue will practice other virtues as well. Generosity is praised and discipline is criticized. This could be applied to any of the paramitas and demonstrates the intention related to an individual. So that's also where you sometimes hear, oh yeah, the Vajrayana is far superior. And this doesn't, of course, mean that the sutras are not valid, but of course just identifying the particular need in a particular context to highlight the value of something and also to break attachment to particular views. So yes, so now it's time for question and answers. Let's stop here. Okay. What do you think about hearing the Kunzusampo prayer from a Nirmanakaya Buddha 3 lifetimes? Well, this is an excellent example. Yeah, that's why we say anybody who hears a great yogi who recognizing him or herself as Samantabhadra, they will be liberated from samsara. But of course, then we don't know when. So, but that's why we say this has a particular profound effect. Mm-hmm. I find the time an interesting one because what is time? Seems like the dreams from provisional meaning. Yeah, so anytime that we talk about time, that is provisional meaning. So when we analyze time, even though time definitely functions in our reality, if we begin to analyze it, we cannot actually find it. Nobody has ever seen the past. Nobody has ever seen the future. And if you analyze the present, also there, you cannot find anything substantial. If there was something substantial, it would have to have a beginning, middle, and an end. And that's where, again, this would never take place, because if we analyze, for example, a moment of time, then it's not necessarily connected with anything in the past. So there's never been anything that you could say leads up to a moment of time, and there's never ever been a moment that it is connected with the future. So that's where it also doesn't stand in relation to anything as something which we could say as something that comes or goes or has any ordinary characteristics of as we understand it. So anything where we talk about time, where we talk about space, and like I said, this really constitutes all apparent phenomena. So whether it's, whether it's Mount Everest, or the Empire State Building, or the, the Arc de Triomphe in Paris, or ourselves, all of this constitutes the relative truth. And the provisional meaning is then the teachings that take these, you could say, appearances into account as being real. Is blowing one's mind like being out in space? Get to a point to make friends with it. How do you deal with a possible hopelessness with such blessings and unable to hold it or take it on? Well, this is relative experiences, that we have these kind of moments where we feel in a particular way, and that comes about due to circumstances. Sometimes we can think a thought that blow our mind, or somebody said something, and of course these are all just experiences that we go through. And that's where, as long as we're within the relative sphere, it's so important that we create the conditions for being calm, for being kind, and that you could say, calm the mind on the basis of our lifestyle, and we calm the mind through the practice of shamatha, and we begin to understand things in a greater way on the basis of vipassana. And this we then integrate in our everyday life with compassionate action. And all such circumstances, they lead then to a greater degree of freedom and a greater degree of understanding what we then refer to as the definitive meaning. But presently, within the relative truth, we very much operate with cause and effect. So that's where we deal with our present experience in terms of lifestyle, non-aggression, good eating, good habits, and the practice of calming the mind through the practice of meditation, and also making aspirations, making bodhisattva prayers. May sentient beings be happy. May there be happiness where I am. May my friends, relatives, and also those that I don't care about, and also those that I dislike, may all of these beings be happy, and so forth. May beings temporarily have happiness. May they have ultimate freedom, and so forth, making these kind of aspirations. That's why so much this is such a prominent part of the of Buddhist practice, is the practicing the aspirations. all of this discussion around intention is also what we call teachings that require interpretation. So it's the place where we can see that we need to interpret. The Buddha says something to someone according to their particular, you say, mentality, and it might seem very strange. And that's where, if you look at some of the teachings of Trukpa Kunli in Bhutan, then for people who come from an outside, they might think that's very strange teachings, very strange ways of teaching. And this is where we then have to understand these teachings. They come with a particular intention, or they are teachings that require interpretation. This, of course, also becomes very evident in Vajrayana, where again we need the entire, for example, notion of deity, even though that in and of itself is very close to the definitive meaning, because it essentially indicates the unity of appearance and emptiness. Then nevertheless, from someone from the outside would need to understand what is the intention of this. You know, what is the intention of deity, mantra, mandala, and so forth. So that's where we talk about teachings needing interpretation, or we sometimes also talk about hidden meanings or indirect meaning. Yeah. Okay. You're welcome. All right. If there are no further questions, we'll conclude. Through all our births, where we may be born, may we be endowed with the 7 good qualities of the higher realms. As soon as we're born, may we meet with the Dharma and have the freedom to practice it properly. At that time, may we please the holy gurus and practice the Dharma throughout the day and night. Realizing the Dharma and accomplishing its essential meaning, may we cross the ocean of existence in that life. Thoroughly teaching the holy Dharma in this world, may we never tire of accomplishing the benefit of others. By this vast benefit of others, without partiality or bias, may all attain Buddhahood together. Okay, thank you.